Hello and welcome. If you're an officer on a chemical tanker, you know how complex MARPOL regulations can be. Today we are diving deep into a crucial amendment, the rules for persistent floaters. Specifically, we'll be covering MARPOL Annex II, Regulation 13.7.1.4, which applies to key areas like the Northwest European waters, Western European waters, the Norwegian Sea, and the Baltic Sea. This guide is designed to help you understand the regulations for Category Y persistent floater cargoes. These regulations directly impact the operations of chemical tankers like the one you see here. To understand the importance of the new rules, we first need to look at how things were done before. Prior to the amendments known as MEPC 31574, Category Y cargoes that solidify, think of palm oils, animal fats, or paraffins, could be discharged in EU ports without a mandatory pre-wash. A pre-wash was only required under very specific circumstances. For example, if the cargo couldn't be discharged according to the ship's procedures and arrangements manual, perhaps due to a pump failure, or if the cargo's temperature didn't meet strict parameters. Pre-wash was usually done for Category X cargoes and then for Category Y cargoes. If the cargoes with a melting point above 15 degrees Celsius, the discharge temperature had to be at least 10 degrees higher, and for those with a melting point below 15 degrees, discharge temperature had to be 5 degrees higher and temperature at which viscosity is 50 millipascals second, whichever is higher. If you are unable to maintain these temperatures, pre-wash is required. So what was the problem with this approach? It was an environmental one. Without a mandatory pre-wash, vessels would discharge their palm oil or similar cargoes and then proceed to sea to wash their tanks. However, residues of these cargoes would remain in the tanks. When the tanks were washed at sea, these waxy, oily residues would solidify, especially in colder water, float on the surface, and eventually wash ashore. This led to serious contamination of beaches, resulting in high cleanup costs for local governments. To solve this, new amendments for persistent floaters came into force on January 1, 2021, and as the slide says, this has actually been a blessing for chemical masters, bringing much needed clarity. Now, any Category Y cargo identified as a persistent floater must be pre-washed at the discharge port when operating within those designated areas we mentioned earlier. This brings us to the key question: what exactly is a persistent floater? A persistent floater is defined as a substance that forms a slick and has very specific properties. It has a density less than or equal to seawater, a very low vapor pressure and low solubility. It is also viscous with a kinematic viscosity greater than 10 centistokes at 20 degrees Celsius. In simpler terms, it's a slick forming substance that floats, doesn't evaporate, doesn't dissolve easily, and is thick or sticky. The regulations apply to Category Y substances that are persistent floaters and also have a viscosity of at least 50 millipascal seconds at 20 degrees Celsius and or a melting point of 0 degrees Celsius or higher. You can identify these cargoes by looking for the code 16.2.7 in column O of chapter 17 in the IBC code. Common examples include many vegetable oils like corn and castor oil, palm-based products, and others like fish oil and lard. So when you are in a designated area with a persistent floater, what do you need to do? The process is a clear 3-step mandatory pre-wash. First, a pre-wash procedure must be carried out in the port of unloading. How much quantity of pre-wash is required? Please check my other video on my channel. Second, the mixture of cargo residue and water from this pre-wash cannot be pumped overboard. It must be discharged to a proper reception facility at the port until the tank is empty, to the satisfaction of the local MARPOL surveyor. Third, only after this pre-wash has been completed and the residue discharged ashore, can any subsequent water introduced into the tank be discharged into the sea in accordance with standard regulations. Means once you are out at sea, 12 miles from the land, 25 meter depth and above, speed more than 7 knots, you can start washing and throw the washings overboard using Annex II overboard discharge. It's important to understand the difference in requirements. For persistent floaters, the pre-wash is absolutely mandatory when you are discharging in one of the designated areas as seen on next slide. If you discharge that same cargo in a port outside of these areas, the pre-wash is only required if you fail to meet the discharge temperature requirements we discussed earlier. But here's a crucial point for non-persistent floaters. If your cargo is not a persistent floater, but it is a solidifying or high viscosity cargo and you are discharging it within one of the designated areas, a pre-wash is still required. Let's say you are carrying a persistent floater, you will need to do mandatory pre-wash in Antwerp. However, if you are discharging a persistent floater in USA or Brazil or India or Australia, mandatory pre-wash is not applicable unless you are unable to meet the temperatures and conditions which I described in previous slides. Let's look at those designated areas again. The map shows the specific zones where this persistent floater regulations apply. This includes the Northwest European waters, which cover the North Sea, Irish Sea, Celtic Sea, and the English Channel. It also covers the Baltic Sea area, the Western European waters area covering the coasts of the UK, Ireland, France, Spain, and Portugal, and finally the Norwegian Sea. The document provides the exact coordinates that define these boundaries. So let's wrap up with the key takeaways. First, if you are carrying a Category Y persistent floater, a mandatory pre-wash is required at the discharge port when you are inside these designated areas. As a chemical mate or master, you must be familiar with these geographical zones to ensure you are always in compliance with MARPOL Annex II. Lastly, remember to make the appropriate entry in the cargo record books. Pre-wash will be required to be entered in code D and J. If you think any particular topic which needs to be covered or addressed to make your understanding better on the oil chemical tankers, please drop in comment. We'll try to make some video. Thank you for watching. We hope this guide helps clarify the persistent floater regulations. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe for more maritime training content. Safe voyages.